Okay, in today's session, what we are going to see is we are going to see property binding. In the previous session, I have explained about the model and the different types of binding based upon the classified on the usage perspective. That is one way or two way. Then I have told you how we are going to bind them to the control element. And basically there are three types of binding types. One is property binding, aggregate binding, and element binding. So in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how to do the property binding. So before we bind the element to a control, we first have to create the model. So in this session, what we would be doing is we would be constructing a JSON model, and I would be using sample data for building this model. So we will learn how to construct the JSON model and bind them to the core, and then I will bind them to the control. So first, JSON model is a JSON model is a part of SAP.UI.model library, and JSON is the extension of the model library, and JSON model is the class that we wanted to instantiate. Now, either we can pass the data through an object or an array or through a service URL to the model. So whichever way we are going to pass the data, that is going to be accepted by this model, and it would be creating the instance of the model. Now I can either call the service or I can just create my own data and I can do it. Now in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create the data on my own, like how the data would be how the data would be written from the service. So just like the data is going to be written by the service, I'm going to construct my own data over here and I'm going to do it. And the data binding here, it's done through name of the attributes. Now if I'm going to bind a data to a variable, I can set my own name to the data which I am binding, and you can set only one data to the model. And the other things are, by default the binding mode is going to be two-way, and this is intended for small data sets that you have to keep in mind before you are going to construct the model. Now, okay, I have built the model. So first of all, after building the model, the data would be contained in the model. Now, for the data to be accessible to a particular control, I can either pass it in a three ways. One is I would get the reference of the core and I will set the model to the core. So the syntax would be to get the core, which is sap.ui.get core of, and set model is a method using which we would be able to set the model. So by default we can only set one model to a element or a core or to a view. Apart from that, if you wanted any other model, then you can set it them through a named model, so which requires one more parameter. So in this example we are just going to use one model, which is why I haven't used it, but we would be doing it as a different example. So this model, the only one model that we are setting, it's going to be the default model to the core, which means all the views and controls that are available in that particular application that is coming under the core, they all get the access to the attribute. So likewise, say for example, if I'm going to construct my model in the controller file, and if I wanted this model to be accessed in the view file, then I can get the reference of the view file through this .getView method and then set the model to the view, so that the control inside the view will be able to get the data. And finally, instead of setting the model to the core or to the table, I can set the model only to a specific element, so that only that particular control get the access to the data. Whereas if I'm going to set the data to the core, and if there are two views coming under the core, then both the views get the reference of the model. If I'm going to set it to a view, then only the view is capable of accessing, the other view is not capable of accessing it. So within this view, how many UI elements you have, like table, two text view, two input fields, they are all capable of accessing the model when I set to the view. The same when I set to a particular control, say table control in a view, only the table control in that particular view get the access to the model, whereas the other elements, they do not get access to that particular model. So you can just create different models and you can suit them according to your requirements. So first, what the type of binding that we are going to see here is property binding. So I have explained a lot about the property binding, which basically means binding a single value to the properties of the control. Now here the binding is done on the basis of two things. One is the name of the property in the model and another one is the name of the property in the control. So one I'm going to refer as control property and other one I'm going to refer as model property. So when these two names are going to be the same thing, then the binding is going to be performed. Now say I have assigned the model to the table, and in the table there is a column with the ID f name. Then in my model there is an attribute with the name f name. Then this value is going to be passed on over that to that particular control. So that's how it happens in the runtime. So these two things has to be mapped. So basically this mapping can be done in three ways. One is for each and every control that we have in SAP UI5, they have this specific methods for performing operations on the binding, like get context to read what is the context that has been binded to this particular control. Then get source, like if you are going to display array of elements and if some element is being selected, then you get to know which is the element selected and so on. Likewise, you have this common method known as bind property. So what this basically going to do is, this is going to basically set the values to the particular property. So this is basically like set attribute method of your WebDyn probe app, which means it is going to set a single variable to particular control. Then the other type of syntax explanation is, while I am going to specify a property in a control, and you usually would have seen that I hard code it by putting it in a double quotes. In the same way, I put the value inside the double quotes, but this time I don't pass it as a variable, because system it's going to interpret it as a text symbol if it is going to be directly within the double quotes. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to tell the system that this is going to come from a model that is allocated to this particular control. So I would specify the value in the form of a curly braces, so that my system understands that okay, he is expecting the value from a model. So I will just go and look into the corresponding model with this particular attribute name, and whichever the one that matches, I will take that value and I will display it over here. So that is how the curly braces syntax is being done. And finally, the path binding. So the path binding is exactly similar to that of a curly braces syntax. The only difference is being that with the curly braces syntax, I only bind the value to the corresponding property. But whereas with the path, we not only specify a value, but also we are going to specify some other additional information, like whenever this value is going to be populated, what are the formatting function that I have to include, what are the data conversion routine that I have to call, what are the date conversion routine that I have to call. So these are something that we have to do it right there. So when I'm going to pass some additional features along with the value, like say for example, whatever is having the success value, then they all should be displayed in the green color. Whatever is having the error value, they all should be displayed in the red value. Now while passing the value to this, I not only pass the value like what is to be displayed, but also I have to pass the value state, like this is an error state, or this is a success state, and so on. So in this case, in that type of scenario, we are going to use this path binding attribute. So now let's take a look at each and every one of this property. The first method that I have told you is bind property methods. Now like I have told you, every control that was created in the SAP UI5, they all has this bind property method. Okay, so what this basically does is, this is going to take an attribute from the particular control and it is going to bind them with an attribute from the corresponding model. So this method, it's going to take two parameters. One is the control property, that is a property from our control that we are creating. Okay, now say for example in the text field we have this value property. Similarly, the other parameter would be model property. So what it is going to do is, it is going to take the name of the attribute in the model. Now using this method, Using the reference of the UI element which I have created, I'm going to call this bind property method, and I'm going to pass in these two parameters. So the first parameter that I would be passing is the property of the control for which I wanted to do the binding, and the second parameter that I would pass is the attribute of the model to which I wanted to bind it. So this will, both these things I have to specify within a double quotes, and this at runtime it's going to perform the binding relationship between the two properties. So that is with the bind property method. So this one you can also use to do the dynamic binding. Say for example, based upon the control, either you wanted to bind a value f name or you wanted to bind a value L name. So depending upon that, depending upon condition, you can call this method and you can specify the binding relationship as whichever the one you have to use according to the situation. Okay. So that's a binding method. Then the next syntax would be curly braces syntax. So this syntax, what we are going to do is, like I have told you, while I'm going to instantiate the UI element, while we specify the property, we usually specify the value in a double quotes. But this time I'm going to use the double quotes, and within that I'm going to use my curly braces syntax, which means my system knows that it's not going to interpret the values. The value has to come from the model. So at runtime, it will look for the value from the model and it will replace it. So the example would be the syntax that I have shown you before. It's the control property is going to be binded to a particular attribute in the model, but this time I'm going to specify it in the curly braces in order to specify the syntax. And the last type would be path. So this path, like I have told you, it's completely similar to that of curly braces syntax. The only difference is being that along with the value that I wanted to bind, I also specify some other information. So this time I'm not going to use the curly braces inside, but instead I'm going to pass the value to the control property. I'm going to pass the value to the property as an object. Okay, so basically here we have specified control property is equal to, then within the double quotes I have specified the value, which means I am specifying an individual value. But here after the control property, I open up the curly braces, which means the curly braces symbol represent the object, and within the object I will specify you the list of attributes. Okay, so for this particular example, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to build a sample data, and the sample data that I'm going to build is going to be in the JSON format, that is JavaScript object notation. So basically in the JSON we write the values in the form of a key value pair. So I have just going to create two properties. One is the name property and another one is the enabled property. Now in order to set the model, so we have seen how to construct the model. That is, for a JSON model, I have to instantiate the library sap.ui.model with the extension .json, and the class that I have to call is JSON model. Now I have instantiated my model. Now after instantiating it, I wanted to set the data to the model. So to do that, I would be using a method called setData method, and I would pass my object of values that I have created in JavaScript notation to be bind to the model. So alternatively, you can also pass directly your data at the time of constructing the model itself with a specific name. So now let's go to the system and do a simple example. I'm just creating a new project. And I create it with the initial view. Now my first step would be, before I construct the model, my first step would be to construct a sample data. So I'm just going to construct a sample data to be binded. Now I'm going to construct it in a way that the service would return to me in a JSON format. So variable data is equal to, so that is going to return as an object, and within the object the attributes and the values are going to be collected. So I specify the value in the form of key value pair. Now the value is going to be hi Yusuf, I have unmuted you.
Yes.
Okay, so you have
Yes,
any
yes.
doubts?
Basically, I have so many doubts. I could not grab all these things because you know that you told me before the first screen the way of execution.
Which one?
Yes, the exercise. Why we missed the exercise 8?
I will do it later. Actually,
Okay.
I was creating the screenshot, right? So I built a different exercise with different application for exercise 8. Okay. But later on I realized that I have did exercise 7 as a model. So if I complete the model but continuously on a continuous basis, then it would be easy for you to understand. So I thought like,
Okay.
okay, fine, I will just come back and I will do the model first and then I will again go back to them.
Okay. You say the 3 type of binding properties, right?
Yes, 3 type of
If you
bindings.
go in, the first second screen is slide. Because as you explained to the theoretical, we could, I mean, I could not understand what is going on and how we do these things. If you give the example with the each of every type, then it will be the easiest for me. I think so.
Okay, so see here, the first one is the bind property method. Okay,
Yes.
what this method basically does is it is going to take 2 parameters. One would be the parameter for the, see, for a binding relationship there has to be 2 sources. One is the model and another one is the control. Okay, so binding is basically just syncing one property in the model with the other property in the control. So whatever is the value here, that is going to appear here. Whatever is the value that is there in the control, that is going to appear in the model, right? So clear till this point, what is binding?
No, but the binding, you are saying that whatever the value exists in the model, it will become in the control, right?
Yes.
The model means like we have the whole list of data.
Yes.
And it will become in the control means we have to show on the screen.
Yes. Now, say
Okay.
take this example. Now this is my
Yes.
model data. Okay.
Yes.
Now this part is my data part that is going to be loaded inside the model. Okay.
Okay.
So once my data is loaded inside the model, I will be having 2 attributes, one with the name and another one with the name enabled.
Yes. 2 fields.
Yeah, 2 fields. 2 fields we would be
Yes.
having inside the model. Okay.
Yes.
So this is one attribute of the model and this is the other attribute of the model.
Yes.
Likewise,
Yes.
for a text field, value is one property and enabled is another property. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Now I'm going to, for this particular value, it should be mapped to the name, and the enabled property, it should be mapped to the enabled, so that at runtime,
Yes.
whatever is the value that is there in the name property would be displayed here in the value property, and whatever is there in the enabled property would be displayed here in the enabled property.
Yes.
Right? Now, to do that, for this particular control which we have created, there is a method called bind property. Okay.
Okay.
So that method is going to create the relationship between these two at runtime.
Oh. It means bind property means whatever the property we have, the control we are going to binding.
Yeah, in the control, I'm going to bind it with the value property.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
And controls we are saying the control is a field which we are translating as a control, right?
Yes. Control is the field that we are translating. This one, the
Yeah.
instance.
Okay.
So now here,
Now I can understand.
okay. So the
Otherwise, otherwise I suppose you are saying the control means the like another folder you created main control.js. I'm
No, no.
putting my whole thinking inside in this control.
Okay, okay. So this value
Okay.
property, so I have passed the two parameters. One is the value property that is from this particular control, and the name attribute that is in this particular control. But when I specify this, I have to specify the location where it is available. So now I'm going to specify that this is available in the root location.
Root location. Okay.
Okay. So meanwhile, binding property enabled, that is also available in the root enabled property of this one. So this root enabled would be representing this one, and the first enabled would be representing this one. So that is with the binding syntax, bind property method. The other one is usually we pass the value directly like this, right?
Yes.
Now instead
Yes.
of that, I'm going to pass the value inside this curly braces. Okay. So whenever this is going to interpret this curly braces, then it means the system understands that that is going to be coming from the binding. Okay. Now what is the default model
That
available for this control?
whenever we create the curly braces, it means we are using the object.
Yeah, you can keep it that way.
Okay.
Okay. Now this is going to come from enabled property, and that enabled property would be this, because
This. Okay.
my text view is also in the core and the model is also set to the core, which means my text view is capable of accessing this data. Now I have specified root enabled. Now this is going to go to the root of the model and it is going to take the enabled property and it is going to take it. Okay.
We
Got.
use hold on. We use a SAP UI get core means we do everything inside in the globally we explain it.
Yes.
Explore
Yes.
it.
Yeah. I'm setting it to the
Okay.
global core.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Now what would happen in the root path? There is an enabled property. You bind it there. That is what I am specifying. Now here value to value I am directly assigning, but here I need a method to map it. So in the method I did it by passing the two attributes, but here at the time of creating itself I am passing it. You got it?
So if we remove the remarks from the o text dot binary property, it will be works, and if we put the remarks on the var o text field, right?
Yes.
Okay.
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 And
Okay. So
this is
we
the curly
here
braces
binding
syntax.
property, from the binding property we are defining which field we read to bind which field.
Yes. Okay. Now not only the field, not only the field, but I also wanted to specify some other functionality along with that. So in that case, the path is the attribute that will be holding you the reference of where to go, to which attribute I have to bind in the model. Okay. But there are other functions like value state, formatter and all that I will show you later stage. Okay. So clear till
Okay.
this point?
I think so. I will try to
Yeah,
grab these things.
you have to.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will wind up with this for today and we will start tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give us the more examples if we said tomorrow or something like that, so we can understand?
Like the same thing you wanted more example.
Yeah, please, if you can.
Yeah, actually, I will give you the video by tomorrow morning.
Okay.
So you try it yourself.
Okay.
This is actually a simple thing, but once you do it, only then you will understand it. Okay, so you just try it once.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
sure you will understand.
no. If I do like this, the same thing, it will be give me the same same results as you shown already. But if I do the different examples, I think I can realize what's going on inside in this.
Okay, so I will give
Logic.
you an example. Okay, you just create a model like this, and in the previous exercise we have created a form, right? Just try to map it with that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so we will see tomorrow again. Bye.